sure the stuff works. Yes. And yes. Yep. Okay. Beautiful. All right. We are back. And in amazing spirits. It's another amazing day. Let's see what happens today. Oh, let me make sure all this is good. Yeah. Don't need this now. This should be okay. And beautiful. Alrighty, let's get this. Let's make sure this is still active. And it is. Okay. So we are back again. We'll see how things go today. Make sure everything's good. It is. Alright. So let's go ahead and get the Discord out there. Yeah, topic of today is going to be the same it's been for a couple days. You know, we are going to be talking about arguments for God. We are looking for individuals that believe that God exists. Any sort of theist or monotheist is preferred. There is the Discord if you disagree. Yeah, I don't think that God exists. I'm an atheist. It's not an agnostic statement, it's an atheist statement. So if you are a theist of any kind, that's the main topic of today. Of course, we're always looking for any disagreement here, so you know, obviously all my beliefs are in the Discord and in the description. Feel free, if you disagree with any of it, reach out, let me know. I think that you know, we're certainly open to more of the socialist debate stuff. We've had a couple, but not as common. But feel free, if you're a socialist, you disagree with me, that's also acceptable. Topic's always free to change. And pretty much any of the beliefs in the description are fair game. That's why we make them public. And I believe pretty much all of them are current. So I need to look back through some of these and just make sure. Let's make sure that the Discord matches. So what do we got in here? Pro-choice, anti-communism, maybe we start from the bottom and just match them up. Anti-Marxism, all socialist philosophy, anti-death penalty, willing to talk about gender theories, what this is, nothing morally wrong with being gay, moral realist, atheist, pro-choice, economic issues. We haven't had like too many economic ops in a while, other than the socialists, so just they're also welcome to join. You know, antitrust enforcement, housing first, reduction in zoning laws, anti-rent control, pro-minimum wage. It looks like I put 15 an hour federal. I think that's fairly defensible. That should be good. I haven't edited that in a while. It could honestly be up to like 18 or 20 more reasonable now, but who knows. Pro-market, pro-welfare, pro-free trade, anti-tariff, pro-import economy, pro-progressive tax rates, pro-union, pro-decommodification of education. Kind of a wacky one. Cryptocurrency should be banned. I don't know if that's a current view anymore. Anti-communism still there. Anti-death penalty still there. Anti-nationalism, that's probably a goofy one. We need to update that one. Because we certainly have we certainly have civic nationalist tendencies now. So I think we will do an update to a few of these. Give me a second. The nationalism thing. I am a civic nationalist. We will save that. Fair enough. So those should be current otherwise. I think we'll just get rid of this one. It's not worth fighting about anymore. Submit that. Yeah, that looks good. So we will copy over most of these. Make sure everything's current in the Discord. Oops, and okay, that should be updated now. So beautiful, our updated beliefs are there in the Discord, so perfect, amazing. Yeah, I think things have been updated mostly. I think we need to do a stream on the abortion argument at some point, because that's an argument my opinion could fluctuate on. Certainly, I've been looking into moral realism from an atheist perspective, and I think virtue theory may lead to more of like a pro-life stance. I don't think it would be a pro-choice stance anymore. So we may even need to update that, but I think I think I've changed my mind on that. So I think let me edit this. It's fine. But yeah, I think we may do some like abortion topic related streams, because I think I would defend more of a pro-life position now. I would just want to see how it holds. At least in comparison to other positions. Because yeah, I actually think from a moral realist perspective, it becomes incredibly hard to defend the pro-choice position. I think if you accept any sort of like virtue theory, like either you should be courageous and you should find the right balance of courage, and you should like have a sense of justice and treat like cases alike, I think it becomes incredibly difficult to defend a pro-choice position. So I've gone back and forth on this issue a lot, but now I think my mind is finally like somewhat firm in it. So I think we'll update at least one and see what happens. We might get a new type of op here, but we'll see. Because yeah, I actually think from a virtue ethics perspective, I actually think it's incredibly difficult to defend a pro-choice position. So just speaking from a moral realist perspective, I think that's really, really tough. I think the pro-choice position is only defensible through either moral anti-realism or relativism, or you have to take like a very, very strict stance that I think becomes very, very hard to defend, which I think you have to take like rule-based morality to defend it, which I think is very, very difficult, or like rights-based morality to defend it. So like I think you could take it from a stance of you have a right to defend yourself almost. Like it gets really, really fucked up, but like I think there was like a famous feminist that argued that, basically compared to being it might have been I don't know, I'll have to look into it again, but they made a okay argument on the surface, but it just seems something's off with it. It's basically like if you compare a fetus to like someone breaking into your house in the middle of the night that you didn't consent to, then you have a right to remove that person from your house. You should have a right to remove the fetus. Seems pretty off to me, but you would have to take like a very strict like rule-based philosophy approach to defend it, something like that, which I just don't think holds. But yeah, I think we'll do some more stream variants, and we'll bring in the abortion topic too. We'll kind of spread it out. Because yeah, I think my mind has certainly changed on it. So I think from a moral realist perspective, it's very, very difficult to defend being pro-choice, but I could be wrong. I would need to see. Hey, King Quinn. How's it going? Tuning in from Malaysia. Love from Malaysia. Appreciate it. Love from the U.S. Right back to you. Hey, Joey W. Key. What's up? Need advice? I can give some advice. It's going to depend on what you need advice in, but I know a few things. Spread it out. Yeah, I think, yeah, I think, anyway, I think that, I had to eat out a hooker in LA for a brownie, and now I think I've contracted something serious. I mean, yeah, I think, that'll happen. I think, especially from LA, I think that's a very high risk. That was but you know, you got to do what you got to do for a brownie, man. But that was a little bit high risk there, but you know, it is what it is. A brownie's a brownie, you know. Dude, it was terrible. You know, you gotta do what you gotta do sometimes. Sacrifices have to be made. It tasted like pennies and hot wings. I would imagine so. Probably some stray cigarette smoke in the background as well. Yeah. Well, you took one for the team. You had to get the brownie one way or another. Oof. But that's a high amount of courage there. High risk, high reward, exactly. Yeah, that type of thing sounds more fitting for Vegas. If you're gonna be that risky. It sounds like you didn't win, so I guess it's good you weren't in Vegas then. You ended up with a little something something after. If there is no cigarette smoke in the background, I don't want it. Yeah. Well, that's just how you know they've seen some things. Yeah. That's my next stop after my newfound news of crabs. Well, you know, just don't lose all your money in Vegas. That's my best advice to you there. Keep some. But yeah, I don't know. It's gosh, it like reset my brain. This is like the type of stories I hear at work. It wouldn't shock me if you'd fit right in where I work. God. Now it's like reset my brain. Yeah, I think, anyway, I think that, God, what was I even thinking? But I think I understand now. Spend all the money only on hookers and nothing on the casino because brownies are the real winner here. Exactly. Exactly. Oh, shit. Yeah. Oh, fuck. Man. Yeah, I think, okay, I remember what we were talking about now. I think, yeah, we're going to do some... I think the documents are finished. I think we're going to keep up with those. I think they're all current now. I subbed in like you're the only one who's acknowledged me and my antics. Gonna stay subbed to when you stream next. I'll bless you with lots of gifts. Cool, I appreciate it. I mean, I could always go for some good, a good story or bit of humor like that. I mean, it's right up my alley. So, come on, camera. It's welcome here. I don't know. You know, there's some limits. You gotta be a little bit careful just for TOS, but no one reads that shit anyway. So, you know, it is what it is. But yeah, we're always welcome to good, fun story or anything of that nature. Certainly not the worst thing I've heard. But yeah, just like the type of work I do, I mean, I hear much worse stories than that. Again, you'd fit right in. Like, I'm a plumber for a living. Like, there's no HR where I work, so the types of jokes we get right up that, definitely, welcome here. I got you, don't even worry, buddy. Have a great day. I'll catch you on the next one. Facts, bro, don't worry. I don't go too crazy. Good. You have some limits. Good. Yep. Have a good one. I appreciate it. That was fun. I needed that. Long day of work. Awesome. Appreciate it. But yeah, anyway, I think that clears the mind. So, yep, I think, again, we're kind of looking for anyone that disagrees with any of the beliefs is open, but the main one is obviously I'm an atheist, so feel free to join the Discord if you disagree, and we can have a conversation. Of course, all my beliefs are in the Discord as well. And obviously, we're going to be defending the pro-life position as well. I would absolutely be open to a change in topic with that. If anyone's pro-choice out there, I'm a moral realist. I think that abortion is wrong or it's unvirtuous, so feel free to change my mind if you disagree. Yeah, so that's another topic that's open. And also, we always end up with some inevitable economic disagreement. If you're like a socialist, Marxist, anything like that, feel free to hop in. If you think you can change my mind on that, I'm anti-Marxist, anti-socialist, so feel free. We're open to that conversation as well. But yeah, I think the biggest things we're going to be focusing on, I'd definitely like to get some more debates going about abortion, because I do think we are going to defend a pro-life stance for the time being. I think the new argument for pro-life is pretty sound from an atheist perspective, because it was really difficult. What always made me pro-choice before is that there were really no atheistically grounded, like, pro-life arguments, but I think I've got a couple. Obviously, I did the one start of the paper with the B theory of time being relevant to morality. Basically, you should just treat any entity as if it was any of its possible states. So in the case of abortion, you should treat it, the fetus, as if it's in its grown state or lower states like zygote state, etc. And you should weigh all of them equally. But I think there was a little bit of a fatal flaw in that, to where it's weird to judge things solely based on one singular accident. It seems like maybe we judge things more on a totality of accidents or totality of essence, but it's hard to say. That one's just in the back pocket. But I think the better argument is just an argument from virtue, or basically a ultimate ought that is self-evident. So I think if there's a self-evident ought, you're contradicting yourself and denying the ought. So, and within this ought, there's going to be self-evident virtues. So I think those self-evident virtues sometimes come into conflict with each other, but ultimately there's going to be one ultimate ought. And I don't know, I feel like once you adopt that moral realist perspective, it's really tough to defend being pro-choice anymore. But I could be wrong. I feel like most of the pro-choice arguments are founded in moral anti-realism. I don't think that they're founded in moral realism, but and since I'm a moral realist, I inevitably become pro-life, because I think there is a virtue in not instrumentalizing things in general. So yeah, another example of a thing that you shouldn't instrumentalize would be a fetus, or even potentially a zygote. So yep, I think it also solves some of the very, very difficult ethical questions that get thrown around as well. So I'd like to test them out, take them for a go, take them for a spin. Maybe we'll make that the focus, actually. I think that's completely fair. Let's go over to that. Boom, and let's go back to this real quick, like, boom, and boom. Yeah, we'll see if we can't get some abortion arguments going. I think we'll change that over to the main thing. Because, yeah, I really would like to test some of these more atheistic perspective arguments. Because, yeah, I don't think that there's too many atheist perspective pro-life arguments. I think most of them are... I think basically all of them are inevitably religious, so it'd be cool to test some more atheistic perspective ones. Because, yeah, I think generally being a moral realist makes it very, very tough to defend the pro-choice position, but I don't know. And I guess that's another question I've gotten. I got it the other day, which is like, what is atheistic moral realism? What does that look like? And it's something I've been pondering a little bit, and I've been reading a little bit about metaethics. I think the ultimate problem that most moral theories end up running into is they end up running into the is-ought problem eventually, especially if they accept agency. Now, I think you could resolve it by not accepting agency, but I certainly think it is very, very difficult while also accepting agency. So, like, you could basically solve it by just avoiding it altogether. So you either have to stay on the is side or strictly the ought side. So basically, for those that don't know, the is ought problem is basically like you can't take a descriptive fact or descriptive statement that's just like a statement of fact or a statement of like qualia or accidents of the thing you're describing. So like an example would be I can't take a thing like saying the grass is green. I can't take a statement like that and then make an ought statement or a prescriptive statement. Like you ought do this because of this. Like you can't go the grass is green, therefore you ought like never cut grass. Like it just doesn't follow. The more like high-end version of it would be like the natural law objection, natural law theory objection. So it's basically like a lot of Christians hold to like a natural law theory of ethics. So they basically think that on our hearts God wrote morality, so we just have like undeniable moral intuition that God just put in us. But you inevitably can't take that and derive an ought from it if you accept agency, or that we can always like intentionally do stuff, basically. Because you could always just be like, well, okay, sure, I don't even have to like deny that fact. I could just be like, okay, why ought I do X, Y, or Z then? So, and it doesn't seem like there's a contradiction in doing so. Like there's no like inference rule broken by doing it. So basically you inevitably have to pick a side. You inevitably have to go like, okay, it could be resolved through all oughts or all ises. Like you can't, so either like agency doesn't exist and like you could do it from an atheistic perspective or a theistic perspective. You could basically go like, oh, it is the case that, let's say, murder is wrong. Okay, why? It is the case that it's like evolved into us. Okay, so why ought I do it just because it's evolved into us? Well, because it just is the case that it's going to be wrong, because that's, you have no agency, right? It's just going to happen whether you like it or not. But then you deny agency, obviously. You could take the agency side of it, which is basically going to be like, okay, so you could always just say, well, you ought not do it, or just say so, whatever, if you're an agent. So you could follow oughts back and look for a universal, undeniable ought instead. And like religious people could do it, or atheistic people. So you could basically follow it back, and you could be like, you could either conclude on like virtue theory if you're an atheist, and be like, there is a undeniable built-in ought called like eudaimonia, or like the good life, that we all ought to work towards, and denial of it is like an innate contradiction. Or you could take like a religious perspective, and you could say that like God is the universal ought. So God is like, one aspect of God is that it's an ought, and build up from there. So it's like your grounding ought. So those are like your two sides you could go from. So just to the person that had that question, like, that's how you get moral realism. You either have to like start with all oughts or all ises. You're never going to be able to like derive an ought from an is. So it's either you don't have agency and it's just like a fact of the matter that you're bound to, that no matter how hard you try as an agent, you can't deny. Or, which obviously would be problematic, because now you're not a true agent, because there's something that you're just, things that you are just going to do, whether you have no choice in the matter. Or you could take the ought side and accept we are agents, and you know, there's basically like a universal ought that you just are beholden to. So, instead of saying there's self-evident is, you just say that there's a self-evident ought. Which, that gets pretty complicated, but inevitably if you start researching into it, you can either take like a virtue ethics stance if you're atheist and become a moral realist, or you could take like a I guess like a theistic stance and just be like God is like a grounding ought, like it's one part of God, that God has a part of him called like eudaimonia, or like the greater good, and he's like the ultimate good, and because that's a part of God, it's the equivalent of all of God because of divine simplicity, and then therefore you have to be beholden to it whether you like it or not, because you could use your agency, but you're going to create a contradiction, and contradictions are innately absurd, and absurdity is going to lead to like failure at some point. So yep, that's basically the gist of that. So yeah, I think that there's a couple different ways of going about it, but that's essentially how I arrive at realism. I think once you accept moral realism or like virtue ethics or anything like it, it becomes very, very difficult to defend pro-life, pro-choice. I think you're inevitably, even as an atheist, going to reach like a conclusion of being pro-life, but it's really, really hard to say. Again, we have to test it out. Like, ultimately, your really, really good pro-choice arguments are fairly tricky, but it's going to come down to just whether or not you accept moral realism or not. So I don't know. That's just my general take. I think if you're a moral realist or like virtue theorist, I think that you are inevitably going to like become pro-life at some point. And I think that's the conclusion I've stumbled upon, which is very, very odd. I would never expect it, but that's kind of where I sit now. And of course, if you disagree, you can feel free to change my mind, but I don't know. I guess that was the big question that needed answered as well. How do you ground it in the first place? But oops. Dang. Man, I need to get out and go fishing probably later this week. I think that would be really, really cool to go. Nope, please do not do that. Give me 1 second. We need to... Why? Just stop, please. Give me 2 seconds. Yeah, I need to get out and get fishing this week for sure. But yeah, I don't know. There's like a couple different things that I think we need to work on. I think we need to get some pro-life debates going. Inevitably. I mean, we could certainly look for one as well. I mean, that's an option. I think that's what we will go through and do. So Give me 2 seconds. I think, let's see here. Let's see. No, that's not correct. But yeah, I think, okay, I should be back now. Cool. We're focused again. I think that generally your pro-life stance is going to be inevitable once you accept moral realism, but I don't know. That's just me. Yeah, I think that your best, let's see here, give me 2 seconds. I'm just changing a few things. Update that. Update that. Update that. Boom, boom. Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's not a defensible position, the pro-choice stance. I mean, I don't know. I think we need to talk it out because it's more or less a newer stance. So, yep. I certainly used to be pro-choice, and I've been pro-choice for a while, and I used to make a very, very good argument for it. I think the best argument for being pro-choice, or your like best bet, would be basically pick like an innate, self-evident ought and defend it from that. So like you ought value agency, for instance, and so as the potential for agency rises, the value rises, and so you inevitably are going to reach a point where it becomes not acceptable to have an abortion, but up until that point, it's fine to abort the child. So I guess I should be a little bit more clinical. It's okay to abort the fetus, but I think if you accept any sort of realism perspective, I think that becomes very, very difficult to defend because you're going to inevitably come into conflict with other oughts. So like you're going to come into conflict with like the ought that as an agent you ought be a good evaluator and treat like cases alike. And you're going to run into like instrumentalization, or basically you shouldn't use things as a means to an end. You should just treat them as ends in themselves as much as possible. Even as something as simple as like a rock you find on the side of the road. Like if you see your kid pick up a rock and chuck it against the ground, you're going to kind of be like, well, just stop, don't do that. Even if they don't throw it through a window or anything that harmed another agent, it's kind of odd to be like, yeah, that was a good thing that they did there, throwing the rock. It certainly seems to lack a little bit of virtue. So you can inevitably start building from there that if you shouldn't just like do things for the sake of doing them or for some innate desire, like the desire to see something break, you could start building up higher versions of that. And then it gets really, really tough to justify like some things that like moral anti-realists struggle with. Like obviously abortion's one, but another one would be like other, like, I guess, I assume it's not TOS, but like sexual immorality, things like bestiality, necrophilia. They seem near impossible to like say that they're wrong from an anti-realist perspective, or definitionally. You'd have to pay a very, very high price to say that you could do these things. So, and same thing, I think, with the pro-choice argument, I think you have to pay a very, very high price to accept it. Because I think it also logically follows, like, and why, like, the best defenses for it inevitably, like, agree with infanticide and eugenics. Because I think you have, it's very hard to say that they're not wrong. It basically becomes like a normative claim that it's just, well, we should just keep these things illegal because keeping them illegal seems to work. But you can't say that they're wrong. You just say, well, it kind of seems like they work, so we'll just keep them that way. If it's worked for the humans in the past, it'll keep working. It seems like the only argument you could take. And that's what, like, some of the highest, toughest argue against arguments do. They just bite the bullet and they're like, yep. Or if you could grow, like, fetuses without brains, you could harvest their bodies for organs. Because, well, they're never going to become an agent. They're never going to become conscious, whatever you choose to value, whatever you choose to defend against or fight for. Up until that point, you can harvest their organs, send them down into a shooting range, do whatever you want with them, which is a very, very high price to pay. And it's certainly the intuition there from a meta perspective or meta ethics perspective is that that is wrong. So I feel like you have to pay that price to inevitably accept pretty much any of the typical, like, tough moral questions. Hey Lillian, what's up? Good to see you. Welcome back. But yeah, I think you have to pay a very, very high price to accept some of these positions. I just think that you do, inevitably. So I think it's something to point out where it gets even tough from a moral realist perspective. So I think it's just something that you need to accept as wrong. So yeah, I think that but yeah, I guess that's like the positive argument, is that you shouldn't instrumentalize things. It shows a lack of courage, lack of virtues, lack of goodness, which is inevitably bad. I think the other thing, it's instrumentalizing, which is a vice, which you should not do, because vices automatically reduce virtue, which in turn makes things bad, or at least have an absence of goodness. So yeah, I think it gets pretty difficult to defend. I think the only way is to just, like, accept anti-realism, but I think you have to pay a very, very, very high intellectual price for it. You basically have to accept that some of the intuition-based wrong things are just wrong, or just, like, okay, or they're permissible. It's just for some reason we arbitrarily choose to not do them, and since it works, the fact that we arbitrarily chose not to do them, we should just, like, keep doing that, which seems like a very, very, very high price to pay. Again, it would be like other forms of immorality that are, like, sort of neutral or questionable. Yeah, I don't know. I think that you have to adopt, like, a realist perspective from some sense. And if you do, then good luck defending the pro-choice position. But I could be convinced out of that. Most of the arguments are very, very bad, I will admit. which is why I think this is an important topic, because I think that there aren't really atheists on the side of the pro-life position, so you don't get like the really, really good, like much more thought out versions of the argument. You also don't get like the really, really good, like more scientific basis on the pro-life side. It's inevitably a little bit like religion based, so yeah, I think it's important to enter this and like move the conversation forward, because we got to make these arguments better. Like, a lot of them are just garbage. Like the autonomy argument, again, if you pick any like universal ought, you're just going to run into conflict with another ought eventually. So you inevitably need like one overarching ought that supersedes all other oughts, and I think you're going to inevitably find that it's like probably going to be something like potential for agency, or it's going to be something like the good life, which consists of like virtues, or you're going to just say it's God or something of that nature, or just some like supernatural psychophysical aspect of the universe. And then it gets really tough to defend stuff. So yeah, I think your best way to remain consistent is to adopt mostly like a pro-life position and just accept realism, and then you could say some of the like questionable things that philosophers have a hard time answering. You have a better, more satisfying answer to. So, but ultimately, that's just my my thought. But yeah, I think that generally, give me 2 seconds here. Give me a couple seconds. We will update this. But yeah, I don't know. Feel free. I mean, pretty much any of the beliefs are open. But yeah, I think the main things that we're going to be focusing on for a little while, I think we're going to focus the abortion argument for a while. Because yeah, I think it's just important. I think most of the arguments are bad, both from the pro-life side and pro-choice side. I think the pro-life side is usually like lacking a little bit of like outside perspective in terms of like a lot of it is like religious based. I think you need like atheist based arguments mixed in there to strengthen it, and then I think like the pro-choice side has some like very like fundamentalist like post-structuralist type arguments and anti-realist type arguments embedded within it, which is how come you inevitably have to pay a very, very high price to believe in it and accept some fairly wild beliefs. So yeah, I don't know, it's just like been a recent change. I think that the pro-choice position is fairly difficult to defend. Once you adopt moral realism, it's kind of tough. I think you have to adopt an anti-realist perspective to defend it, which you have to pay a very, 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 very high price for. So you have to admit some things just are simply not, at least they're not good or bad. They're just like, they are what they are. Which I think is a very, very high price to pay. You struggle to say some things that are like innately gross, like you kind of lose some grounds there. So at least to remain consistent. So I guess as long as you're willing to pay that price and accept the inconsistency, or I guess like the the like intuition-based wrongness, then I guess that's fine. But ultimately, I think it's a bad price to pay. So that's what I'm mostly interested in. But we'll see. I don't know if it's been as big of a issue for people, but we'll see. Again, I used to make some pro-choice arguments, and I thought they were like fairly good. So, but I also was like flirting with anti-realism then. Well, now I'm a realist, a moral realist. So, I don't know. I feel like you have to adopt anti-realism or moral anti-realism to defend abortion, but ultimately my mind could be changed on that. I just think most of the arguments are fairly weak, but there's a couple really, really tricky ones. So, certainly a few. I think, ooh, wait, we could have... No, it's not gonna happen. Damn. But yeah, I think there's a very, very high price to pay with that general moral mindset. So, I don't know. It's the mindset I used to have, so I don't think it's like completely unfounded. I think you just have to pay a very, very intuition-based price for it. But I mean, we'll see. There might be someone with some unique argumentation we haven't heard yet, but most of the main arguments are fairly bad. So, but yeah, I think that there's a very, very high price to pay. At least in my mind, but I don't know. That's just kind of my general thought. I think once you adopt realism, it's really, really tough to defend the abortion position, but what do I know? That's what we're out here to do. That's what life is. It's all learning. So it's all you do is keep learning more and more. Nothing wrong with that. Ew, yikes. Wait, is he not? No. But yeah, I think generally I've come to the conclusion that the pro-life position's more sound, but it seems like the biggest objection is like, how can you be pro-life and an atheist? But because it seems mostly grounded in the belief in God. But again, I think you can achieve moral realism through atheism, so I don't know. Let's see here. Give me 2 seconds. No, 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 no. No. Come on, you. Let's see. Nope. No, I just don't think that is gonna work. Give me a couple more seconds here. No. Oof. Yeah, I don't know. Hold on, give me 2 seconds. We'll pull it up here. And pull this up. And no, that ain't happening. Nice try on that one. Yeah, I think that generally the main focus is going to be some of the abortion debates for a little while on the stream. Just because I've recently adopted the pro-life position. I used to be pro-choice. And I think that the only reason why I was pro-choice before is because I adopted more of like an anti-realist or moral anti-realist perspective. I think once you adopt a moral realist perspective, defending the pro-choice position becomes very, very difficult. Because either you have to just pick a principle and arbitrarily stick with it, and you're going to inevitably run into other principles. But if you're an anti-realist, you think all these principles are just like subjective, there's no correct one, so you're going to end up having to bite the bullet and accept some fairly absurd things. Or you're going to attempt to do it from a realist perspective and basically run into the same problem, whether you're on the ought side or the is side of moral realism. You're going to end up running into some contradiction. You're going to have like one virtue that it might follow that is going to run into another virtue, and you're ultimately going to have to make a decision on if the action overall is virtuous or not, and you're going to need some sort of grounding virtue for that. So I don't know, I just don't think it's a defensible position anymore. Again, I used to be pro-choice. I could be convinced back. I think I used to give a pretty good argument for it I think I picked a very, very strong fundamental principle, which is agency, and defended abortion from the perspective that the potential for agency is what we value. Simplicator, it's just like a fact of the matter. If you attempt to not, you run into absurdity. But there's other things simplicator that we do. So like, you ought be a good evaluator, simplicator. You ought not instrumentalize things if possible, simplicator, right? So you're going to have to like reconcile these contradictions essentially to hold the belief. But again, I could be convinced back, but I don't see how from under a realist perspective you could hold the pro-choice position. Maybe there's people out there that have actually thought about it, but I highly doubt it, because most of the arguments seem to be from an anti-realist perspective, or like from like a feminist structuralist perspective on the pro-choice side, and I just think those arguments are a little bit absurd. But that's how come you end up with like the breaking and entering argument, bodily autonomy argument, stuff like that. They're just like innately bad arguments. They fall apart fast, or you're going to inevitably run into another principle that contradicts the principle you're attempting to defend. I think the only way you could say something's right or wrong is through a collection of oughts that's founded by a singular ought that just like takes ultimate precedence. I don't think you could hold to one particular lower level ought and defend it to the grave, because you're going to run into contradictions. I think that's why we get governments and everything that we have now, is because we inevitably have to make a decision on what oughts or entitlements people have, or rights that we just have to sacrifice to make things coherent. So I think you're going to struggle to reconcile the most amount of virtue possible or oughts possible and be pro-choice. I think you're going to struggle. At least that's the conclusion I came to. So, yep. So I tend to get that objection of like, oh, have you considered that you're wrong or whatever? Like, it's like, well, it's a very low level objection, right? Yeah, I literally held the opposite position. So yes, I've thought very, very carefully. So if there's something in one of these arguments I've missed, I'll be glad to hear it. But I don't think that, yeah, I just don't think that you're going to see like some like innate like craziness. Give me 2 seconds. But yeah, I don't know. I guess that's just my 2 cents about it. I could have missed something somewhere. But yeah. Hey, what's up, WAS? How's it going? What do I think of the bodily autonomy argument? I, even when I was pro-choice, found this argument extremely unconvincing. It's weird to take a singular right and argue that that right trumps all other rights in all cases. Like that there is a like master right. So like if you're going to evaluate the goodness of a situation and determine if it's right or wrong, it's weird to say that there's only this one virtue or one ought that applies. Like, you ought leave people to settle themselves out, or you ought have freedom, or you ought have bodily autonomy. These are right and self-evidently the case. The problem is that I think you're going to run into contradictions, right? You're going to run into, like, okay, sure, I have the right to do this thing, but this person's going to feel that they have the right to do this thing. So, like, an example would be, like, one self-evident ought is you ought value agents, just by virtue of being an agent. The reason why this is self-evidently valuable is because denial of it is contradictory. So, like, if I say you ought not value agents, the only way I could utter that statement is by speaking the value of agency into existence. Because if I don't have the ability to use my agency how I see fit, or if all the other people didn't value my agency, they would have just beat me over the head with a rock, and I wouldn't have been able to state that. So the only way I can make that statement is if I value the thing which I'm trying not to value. So you basically speak it into existence. So it becomes a brute fact. It kind of becomes on the same level. It's different because, like, prescriptive brute facts, I think, have a slightly different standard than, like, is brute facts, or just, like, fact of the matter brute fact. So, like, but I think they're comparable. So, like, if you do, like, you know, the not operator in logic is a brute fact. Because in order to say the not operator does not exist, you have to use the word not to say that not does not exist, which makes no sense. So you inevitably just have to accept that it's there because it's impossible to deny it without the use of it. So it just must always be present. You could find the same thing with some of these virtues, and I think the bodily autonomy argument runs right into that. I think that it runs into the fact that there's other self-evident oughts, and now you have to somehow have some universal ought or make a decision on what gets precedent, and I feel like it would be arbitrary to pick bodily autonomy. You have to weigh all of it together. It's the same thing, like, yes, I have the right to be free, but someone else feels that they have the right to live. We now have a contradiction. If my use of freedom is I want to kill as many people as possible, that is going to contradict the person that's saying I want to live, or I believe I have a right to life. So somehow we have to resolve these differences. We have to pick one. And so what you could do is you could look to more universal oughts or weigh them all together and basically have, like, the more you can get to work in harmony, the better. So, like, I don't think picking one particular self-evident ought or virtue is the way to go. I think it's just silly. Like, I think you ought balance all of them. Like, yes, justice is important, freedom is important, but you have to balance that with, like, courage. You have to balance that with honesty. You have to balance that with being a fair evaluator, right? You have to treat like cases alike. So we have all these other ones to consider. You're kind of just running face first and say, oh, this is the one that takes precedent. It seems weird to me. It seems impossible. It seems like too high of a ought. Because I think I could just, like, beat it with another ought of, like, well, I have the right to freedom, and part of my freedom is I want to, like, smack you over the head with a rock. I don't know how you resolve that difference, just one versus one. I think you have to take everything into consideration. So most of those arguments are going to run into the same problem. So that's my opinion on the bodily autonomy argument. I think picking one singular right or virtue is just ridiculous. And I think it's the same problem most of the pro-choice arguments run into. I don't think they evaluate things as, like, from a moral realist perspective, that there's going to be a most perfect balance where the life of the fetus is considered, as well as the autonomy of the agent carrying the fetus. You have to reach a perfect balance, and then you achieve the good life, right? You achieve eudaimonia, as I believe like Socrates would have used, right? It's basically going to translate roughly to the good life. So I think from a moral realist perspective, it falls apart. From an anti-moral realist perspective, it's a little bit more defensible, because now you're just reasoning my principle versus yours. So maybe that principle wins vast majority of the time, but from a realist perspective, that there's just like a fact of the matter, or that there's multiple like self-evident virtues or multiple self-evident oughts that are going to conflict with each other, you inevitably have to achieve a perfect balance of all of them. And once you do, you have goodness. I think any abortion violates the balance of virtue. So I think it shows, I think it violates the courage virtue in terms of like overcoming base desire when it's easy to not do that, or easy to succumb, choosing to not do it anyway. I think it violates that virtue. I think it violates I think it is the vice of instrumentalization, or basically using any object as a mere means to an end instead of an end in itself. I think you have to like answer all these. I think you have to like say, oh, okay, I think that I don't know, I think that there's only this one ought and all these other ones are just nonsense, is basically what you'd have to say, which is denying a lot of like self-evident oughts. So I don't know, I just don't think that it achieves like an objectively good fact of the matter balance. I don't think it achieves eudaimonia. So that would be my response. I hope that's helpful. But yeah, I think that the bodily autonomy argument is going to be generally fairly weak. Picking any one principle is going to be weak, right? You have to make a more whole argument, or you have to make a very foundational argument that like abortion is a part of the good life, or a part of like the objective ought that we all share, which I think you have a very, very tough time doing, because a lot of our intuitions from a meta-ethics standpoint find it appalling, and you're going to struggle to ground it, I guess. So I hope that helps. I just don't think it's that strong of an argument. I think a stronger argument, if you want like a good faith, like really, really strong argument, you could use the argument that I would use back when I was pro-choice. You could use the argument of agency and the potential for agency. So like the reason why we value things is not simply by virtue of them being alive. We value things strictly because they have agency, or the potential for agency. And the way you demonstrate that is obviously like animals have a lower potential for agency than humans, so we don't value them as much. Like a dead person obviously has a lower potential for agency, so you should just, obviously a dead body basically becomes the equivalent of property to the family, becomes very, very less worthwhile. That is a very, very tough argument, but I think it still runs into the same problem of like, okay, so you have this one valuable thing or one virtue, which is agency, or the intentionally doing things in your life is a virtue, and taking control over your life is a virtue. But what about instrumentalization? Like, just because you can have control over things doesn't mean you ought to have control over things. And like another version of this, you could choose experience instead, or like the experience portion of consciousness is what brings value, but that becomes very difficult because arguably a lot of like higher intelligent animals possess experience. So, or at least we believe that to be the case just because of their brain structures, right? From a naturalist perspective, and I guess from a supernaturalist perspective, you'd say that they still have like some type of soul or something. But yeah, I think that's I think if you try to take one principle, you're gonna struggle every time. And that's what pretty much all the arguments do. I think you have to make a totality approach if you're on the ought side of moral realism. And of course, if you're an anti-moral realist, it's just like, well, abortion seems to work. Like, our societies are fairly good right now for the people that get to live. So, like, I guess we should just keep doing it. But that's fairly weak, because if there's an innate moral wrong happening, like, just because Nazi Germany worked well, you wouldn't say, like, oh, Nazi Germany generally functions, so we should just allow that type of behavior. No, you wouldn't say that. So, or at least if you're an anti-realist, I guess you would commit and just be like, well, yeah, I mean, at least in their perspective, yeah, if it was working, they should have done it. And now you're agreeing to like a very, very important position. So you're paying a very, very high intellectual price. So, yeah. I think, I don't know. I think you just have to pay a super high moral price to either be an anti-realist or to, like, be pro-choice in general. Even if you are a realist, you're paying a very, very high price because you're saying, like, you're picking one of the self-evident oughts and just like, oh, this is the one. Like, you ought be a good evaluator because you ought treat like cases alike. Because if you fail to treat like cases alike, you obviously have contradictions innately present. And that's a contradiction is obviously going to be illogical, and anything illogical doesn't exist. So you're just into absurdity now. So, I don't know. Hope that helps. I think the bodily autonomy argument's like one of the weakest ones you could do. Again, if you want like a good faith, really, really good pro-choice argument, use the one I used to use. You know, use the agency-based argument. Just agents are innately valuable. That's going to be your best bet. Or you could do the experience-based one as well, I guess, if you're a vegan. But I think vegans are the only ones that can use the experience-based argument. You're going to struggle with that. I guess you could use the totality of conscious mind as well, but totality of conscious mind, you're going to ultimately be able to question, well, what the hell does that contain? Like, because conscious mind interacts with unconscious mind sometimes, so like some of those like intrusive thoughts that become conscious, are those really valuable? No, like we're clearly not valuing like a random thought to break something or a random thought to do something bad, right? We clearly don't value that. Otherwise people would just act on them. So it's really tough to say the totality of the conscious mind has value, so I wouldn't do that. You should probably do an agency-based argument if you're genuinely looking for like a good pro-choice argument. And I hope that helps as well. I don't know which perspective you're coming from, but I think being on the pro-choice perspective for a while myself, I think that's your best bet. Argue from agency, because it seems like the easiest to prove it to be a brute fact or self-evident. But yeah, pretty much all your other arguments are going to be fairly weak, including like bodily autonomy, because you're just going to run right into a contradiction with other rights. So you ultimately need to evaluate all rights together. in order to make a good evaluation as to whether or not something's right or wrong. At least from an atheist perspective. From a religious perspective, I mean, you obviously just say, I mean, there's just this brute fact, right? So, but yeah, I think that's kind of a tricky part, and I'm never going to argue from that perspective, because I think that's one of the issues with the pro-life perspective, is that it's usually dominated with purely religious people. So, and a lot of the positions relate back to like an A theory of time, or like a straight up like future doesn't exist type theory of time, which I think is like C theory, if I remember. It's what a lot of like religious people subscribe to. The future doesn't exist yet. Like you end up having to subscribe to like these things. I think if you take a more atheist approach, it becomes tricky. So that's what we're mostly trying to do, just move the conversations forward, because most of the pro-choice and pro-life arguments are quite garbage, I would say. At least if you try to read philosophers, a lot of them are like, just bad. Like, I think it's Dubois. Who was the famous feminist? They had like a argument like the bodily autonomy argument. I think it's like the harm argument, pro-choice. Let's see. Who? I think it was Dubois argued that one. I'm going to have to go on a deep dive and find it. It's basically, the gist of the argument is like, a fetus is the equivalent of like a person breaking into your house in the middle of the night. And part of it is like, oh, I left the window open and now this person's here. So sure, I did something irresponsible and put someone in a situation that they could now end up dead. Like, I'm going to shoot them dead to defend myself. They basically compare that to the fetus of, even if you're irresponsible, sexually irresponsible, and end up producing a child, that child is equivalent to the burglar. Like, you still didn't consent to the child, so because no consent was present to the child's presence to begin with, the child has no rights. Or that becomes like the ultimate right, the right to, it's not even autonomy per se, it's like a right to, like, I guess self-defense, I guess. That actually might be pro-choice self-defense argument. Judith Butler, I think, argued that one. So if you're looking for like a version of the argument that holds a little bit longer than the bodily autonomy argument, then you would look to Judith Butler. She, like, that's the thing, that's why a lot of the arguments are a little bit wacky, because they're like founded in like post-structuralist feminist ideology. They're like, they get a little bit wacky, and it includes the bodily autonomy argument. Like, they basically come from like, there's no like objective fact of the matter, so it's just like, pick your favorite principle, and if it's more convincing, that's the one we should do. And that's just silly, because ultimately, like, that's the ideas of post-structuralists and structuralists, is that you're just like a pawn in the system or whatever. So they already kind of reject rights innately, so they're kind of even appropriating rights when they argue about it. So I don't know, I think it's just like a general misunderstanding of what makes something right or wrong. Something's right or wrong because it's like a indisputable like fact of the matter. Unless you accept anti-realism, and then of course if you're an anti-realist you have to pay a very, very high price, because you can't say obviously bad things to everyone else are bad. So you're gonna not be able to say, I mean, I don't think it's TOS, but any of the like sexual immoralities bad, so like bestiality, necrophilia, I guess like brainless corpses, like if you could somehow grow brainless corpses, like would it be okay to like do that, like just grow them for the sake of growing them and like harvest their organs or like sell them as like, it's really uncomfortable, but it's like sell them as like sex dolls or something? Like, no, this is obviously gross to everyone with a bit of moral intuition. So yeah, I think it's just like, yeah, I think if you adopt a realist perspective, you have to evaluate it more precisely. So I think it's going to be more akin to like instrumentalization. Like just because you have the desire to like do what you want doesn't mean you ought to do what you want. So just because you have the desire or an innate right to freedom doesn't mean that you always should exercise that right. Simplicator. Like it's going to run into other rights. And like I think it's even more fundamental than like life is a granted right. I think you just, anything that exists has a right to not be instrumentalized. Even like super like fundamental alive things. Like I would even take it as far as like if you're a researcher and you just like grow and kill bacteria for the fun of it and you're not actually doing any research, it seems fairly fucked up. Like, or it's at least non-virtuous. It's not like, obviously you wouldn't punish them by any harsh means, but you'd just be like, why are you doing that? Do something more productive. So it's certainly not virtuous. It's not like the ideal good life. So I don't know, I think you have to apply like a standard across the board, and you ultimately need a way of placing stuff on like unvirtuous or less moral and more moral facts of the matter. So I don't know, it gets kind of tricky, but that's my general thought. I don't think it's the best argument. Most of the arguments suck. Again, they just pick a single principle, or they're coming from an anti-realist perspective and they're just like, this principle is more convincing than the other principles, so believe it. And doesn't matter. Moral facts are moral facts, and then there's going to be a like grounding fact of the matter. So, but yeah, I don't know. It's going to be pretty much the same with all the arguments, but I think the bodily autonomy argument's probably the weakest. Well, I mean, there's certainly weaker ones. Like, I think picking some artificial organs probably a weird way to go about it. Or just some, like, arbitrary principle, like implantation or something. Like, that's what makes things valuable. Like, or like brains or hearts or lungs, like picking anything like that. Spines, femur bone, whatever you decide. Digits, whatever random thing you pick. I think that's probably like a step below, because I think at least the bodily autonomy argument like picks a right or self-evident ought to start from, and not just some is. And doesn't immediately run into the is-ought problem, like, instantly, but it's still weak in terms of, like, all the arguments possible for, like, principles. I think it's, like, a lower-lying principle of a lot of other principles. Like, freedom in itself is a lower-lying principle than some other things, like life and bodily function in general. Not just bodily autonomy. Like, there's more fundamental like entitlements than that it's just going to get trumped by, or at least it's going to be contradicting them. So you need some way to point at it and say, yes, this is like an acceptable contradiction here. And I just don't see how you would have one within the bodily autonomy argument. So yeah, I mean, ultimately they use like their violinist problem and stuff to try to make it seem more like morally intuitively wrong, but usually I think the violinist argument's a bit of a non-starter. Like, I don't think it's comparable to most abortion situations. I think you have to use more like a drunk driver analogy. Like, drunk driver puts someone in a hospital. Does the person that they injured have a right to their body to keep them alive? It's like, probably not, but to some extent, a little bit. Like, you have to evaluate it from a more objective perspective. Which is why I think most of the arguments, even on the pro-life side, suck. Because they're just going like, well, this principle. Oh, you have a heartbeat. Therefore, value. It's just running face first into the is-ought problem. Same thing the pro-choice side does. Bodily autonomy. Therefore, you ought not ban abortion. It's like, okay, well, you're deriving an ought from an is, so that's already, you're running face first into that problem. You need to resolve that problem. What if I considered it, don't care? You know, how do you respond to that? Is that even a possible thing that you can respond to? So, I don't know. I think you have to adopt more realism to stand a chance, but I don't know. I could be convinced otherwise, though. But yeah, I always found the bodily autonomy argument to be the weakest. But hey, I mean, I would certainly be willing to have my mind changed. Maybe there is an innate principle and one singular principle or one singular ought. But we'll see. We'll see. I don't think I'll be convinced of any single like principle-based argument. I think it has to be like a broader argument. Has to come from a realist perspective, I think. But I don't know. I think you just have to pay too much of a price to be an anti-realist. Just have to pay way too much of a price. So, at least in my mind. But hey, you never know. Maybe there's a principle I missed that is the grounding principle, and then somehow that justifies being pro-choice, but I don't think I missed the principle. I think they all come from an anti-realist perspective of like what principle sounds more good, not what is the fact of the matter of like all these principles combined to create a right or wrong situation. So I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I was pro-choice for a very long time, so I don't know. Most of the arguments were pretty garbage. I mean, you literally had the self-defense argument, which I think kind of like the bodily autonomy argument stemmed from. It was kind of like a slightly better version of that. I don't know. I think that they're all like a little bit silly, but I think you have to pay a very, very, very high price. So, I don't know. I think that's just a new thing that we're going to be arguing on the grounds of. Is just from a more realist perspective. So, we'll see though. We could ultimately have our minds changed. Let's see here. No. But yeah, I think the bodily autonomy argument, not the best. So, although I would gladly be open to having my mind change if someone can like articulate the argument very, very, very well, and like maybe there's something I missed, but I don't think so. I think that's one of the worst ones you could pick. It just seems like a lower level principle. Because even like the principle of agency, I think trumps the principle of bodily autonomy. Like I think I could find a situation right away where like agency trumps bodily autonomy, but like I think like if I need to basically desperately do something and you're standing in my way to do it, I think you sacrifice some bodily autonomy right away. So like if I need to save a drowning person and you're standing in the way, I think, and you're like actively trying to prevent me from doing it, and I've made the choice as an agent to go try to save the person, I think your bodily autonomy is trumped by my agency and my other virtues I'm showing, like courage and stuff like that. I don't think bodily autonomy is even like that high of a virtue or self-evident ought to like be good grounds to stand on. I think it gets trumped by agency. I think it gets trumped by what else? Agency is a big one. I'd say it gets trumped by justice, obviously. So, like, if you've committed an injustice, you automatically lose your bodily autonomy. Like, you know, if you kill someone, we tend to take away your bodily autonomy and either kill you or put you in confinement or do something like that. Like, I think bodily autonomy is like a lower principle. Like, I think it's probably one of the worst principles you could pick to argue from. I think you would be better off arguing from like agency or something. And even then, like, that's going to get trumped sometimes. Like, obviously, you could just use your agency to be like, well, I want to go kill as many people as possible. And we're obviously going to find that appalling. So agency is even going to get trumped sometimes. But, yeah, I think agency trumps bodily autonomy, so it's already, like, a lower thing. So, like, if as soon as the fetus starts to have potential for agency, the bodily autonomy argument starts to fall apart. But obviously that doesn't stop like the really, really early abortions. I think you have to look at other principles. I think you have to look at principles like justice, treating like cases alike. I think you have to look at like vices that automatically reduce your virtue, things like instrumentalizing things, especially living things, is not good. So basically like using something as a mere means to an end instead of treating things as ends in themselves. It could even be as something as like unvaluable or invaluable as like a rock. Like just picking up and chucking a rock against the ground is slightly less virtuous than just like not doing that. Like you'd certainly be annoyed at your kid for doing that. So if you saw them doing that, like dude, go do something else. So you could start building up from there. Now you start getting to things like animals, like just smacking an animal for the sake of smacking an animal seems kind of ridiculous. Like, why are you doing that? Like, you know, of course there are people that are carnivores, so you kill the animal, but it seems like, okay, at least you're getting fed then. But it seems like doing stuff for the sake of doing them is a vice, and you shouldn't do that. And you could keep building until you reach abortion inevitably, where just because you have a desire to do something else doesn't mean that you ought just kill a thing. Even if you don't think that thing's quite yet a person, you just, even like a zygote or something, it's just like, why? I think you need a much more convincing reason than just autonomy. You need an ultimate collection of reasons. So, and that's where like most of the abortion arguments fall apart. even on the pro-life side, like just be like, oh, it has a heartbeat now it's valuable. It just runs like face first into the Izot problem. You have to argue more fundamentally that it just seems wrong to just like cast something aside or kill it for the sake of killing it, even though it's not like as valuable as like a full-grown thing yet. It just seems weird. Like, why do that? It's certainly more virtuous to not do that, so it seems like you should not do that. Or you would certainly be more courageous in not doing that. You'd certainly be having a better sense of justice, that even things with like poor capacities for agency should be protected to some extent. Like, I don't know. I think that you're violating a lot of virtues and engaging in a lot of vices, so yeah, I think that's just like not a great argument, personally. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I think if you want like a slightly better one, you could take agency as a whole. Gets a little bit more tricky, but agency as a whole still seems like it falls into problems. Because there's certainly things that don't have the same potential for agency as like a late trimester fetus or a full-grown human, that we seem to like not like being harmed. So again, it seems weird to just like smack animals for the sake of like smacking them, or hurting them for the sake of hurting them, even though their capacity for agency is lower. Oh, come on, we're closed today. Stop. But yeah, I think you ultimately have to weigh all virtues equally. I'm sorry about the phone ringing. It's supposed to be closed. But yeah, I think that any particular like one principle you pick is going to fall apart. I think you have to argue it more from like a realist perspective, moral realist perspective, and say there's like a universal fact of the matter that's just violated by doing it, or not violated by doing it. So that's going to be your like best plan of attack. And it seems to me, once you adopt a realist perspective, even as like an atheist or as a theist, you're inevitably going to just come to the conclusion that there's some of these like morally questionable things end up becoming just wrong. Now you could say that there's a continuum of wrongness, but they all lie within wrongness because they're all not working towards more good things, so you shouldn't do them. They're not moving towards, I guess from the atheist perspective or virtue theory perspective, they're not moving towards eudaimonia or the good life, right? Or from a religious perspective, they're not coming from like the innate ought, which I guess you would say is God or the ultimate foundation. So, yep, I think you have a couple different issues there. So, I think you need to resolve them. And I think if a pro-choice person could resolve, like, okay, it's ultimately all the collections of virtue together ultimately create a fact of the matter that abortion is acceptable, then yeah, I would probably accept that. But most of them just pick a single principle, and you can inevitably find another principle that trumps that principle. So that's why you need like a fact of the matter of some kind. So, and once you do that, I think once you become a moral realist, or you say that there's a fact of the matter in morality, I think the abortion argument becomes silly. They're very, very difficult to defend. Like, extraordinarily difficult. You have to pay a very, very high price in pretty much any principle you pick. Because, yeah, also, even with bodily autonomy, is it like, is it strictly bodily autonomy? Because clearly we don't honor all bodily autonomy, like, of all things that have bodies. or just complex biological structures, right? We clearly don't value the bodies of animals. We clearly don't value, at least not enough to spare their life. So it seems just kind of like an arbitrary principle, like most of the other arguments. But I don't know, it gets tricky to argue against them because I think most of the retorts just bite bullets on whatever thing they give you, like the cliff example or the violinist argument. I don't even think you have to bite those bullets. I think you could look at those scenarios and kind of just be like, well, it's still a fact of the matter that it's wrong because you're not moving towards the good life, or you're not moving towards the ultimate ought, which if you're religious, you're going to say is God. If you're an atheist, you're going to say it's the good life. Or if you discount agency altogether and you're, I guess, like, completely reject free will, completely reject agency, either from a religious or non-religious perspective, I think you kind of reach a very, very absurd point where, like, you could just say, well, it is a fact of the matter, this thing, so you have no choice in it anyway. It seems kind of silly to me, but I don't know. I could be convinced otherwise, but yeah, I think the response is very, very nuanced. And I think whatever retorts you hear, probably not the best, is most arguments that you're going to hear. Some of your best arguments are just going to be pointing out, like, the obvious continuance. Also things like, you know, if you could, well, even like the argument I used to make with agency or like experience or like the whole conscious mind, it seems fairly tricky. Because even then you could be like, well, if we could grow bodies without minds, should you? And like, should you do whatever you want with them? It still feels kind of wrong there, so seems like there's still like a fact of the matter being missed. So, I don't know. That's just my general conclusion. But I feel like once you accept moral realism, it becomes very, very difficult to defend the pro-choice position. But that's probably what would change my mind if a moral realist can give me like a realist explanation to abortion. But I don't think that exists because most of the arguments are based in anti-realism, and they're based in like literal anti-realism, not just moral anti-realism, and they're just based on an absurd foundation. Like the self-defense argument from Judith Butler, it was kind of just wild. I think that's a good example. But yeah, I think all those struggle. So I don't know. I could have my mind change though. But I hope I've explained enough, and I hope that answers your question with the bodily autonomy argument. I just think it's bad. You shouldn't use it. You'd be better off with like agency or some other type of argument. So feel free to use that one. I mean, I used it for a while and it seemed fairly consistent, but I think there are some critical defeaters with it, which is why I became pro-life. But if you can evolve it forward and enhance it, and I couldn't, then good for you. And maybe that's going to be your best chance to change pro-life people's minds if that's your goal. But yeah, just to show them good faith there you go. Hope that helps. But yeah, there's some really wacky arguments, like the self-defense argument and stuff. I think they're just a little bit out there. I don't think any of them hold water, but I don't know. Certainly could have my mind changed. We will see. We will certainly see. As time progresses. But Yeah, I hope that answers that. Autonomy, not your best approach. So, yeah, I think ultimately abortion is going to be a moral wrong. I think it's a fact of the matter, but I think you'd be hard pressed if you're a realist to defend abortion, but especially from the autonomy side. But yeah, I don't know. I think that there's some uncomfortable things with it that you just have to pay a very high price for accepting it. Like a very, very high price. So, but we'll see. Mine could be changed. Mind could be changed. We'll see moving forward, though. I don't know. The other things that we need to do, I think we need to do more of the, like, socialism type streams and basically, like, defend our stance against socialism as well at some point. But we'll do those next, I think. I definitely want to focus on the abortion argument for a little while. Definitely curious to see if we can be convinced to be pro-choice, because I've certainly come to the conclusion of pro-life, but we'll see. Maybe I missed something. That's what we're here to do. We're here to be challenged. So we will see if we get anyone with the courage to challenge. But I don't know. I do not know. I think the probably not. I think we've thought it through good enough. I think the pro-choice position is fairly, I think most of the mainstream arguments are fairly bad, but we'll see. We could have missed something, so only time will tell. Every day is a learning experience. So yep. Okay, I think this is going to be the end of the stream for now. I appreciate the people that came out today. We will be streaming again probably tomorrow. And I appreciate everyone that came out today. And yeah, thanks for coming out. Join the Discord. If you disagree with any of my positions, feel free to set up a conversation and we can talk about it. So, yeah. Feel free to join the Discord if you disagree. Again, I think some of my positions, I mean, if you disagree with any one of them, feel free to join it and let me know. We can have a chat. I'm currently considering myself pro-life. I'm an atheist. You can feel free to talk about that if you'd like. You could also, if there's any socialists that think that I've got it wrong and socialism is actually great, I'm anti-socialist, so feel free to hop in on that as well. But yep, that's the Discord link. It's also in the description. Feel free, if you disagree, join in. We can have a conversation. I'm here to be challenged, and all my beliefs are in the Discord as well. I think the only belief that's not current is the pro-life position. I think the pro-choice position's still in there from a while ago, so that's the only one that hasn't been updated, so the rest of the positions are current. So feel free, if you disagree, to argue with any one of those positions. But you know, I'm pro-life. I think it's just a fact of the matter that abortion is wrong, but I could absolutely be convinced out if you could demonstrate why it's a fact of the matter not the case that abortion is wrong. So we're absolutely open to it. Feel free to hop in and have a conversation. Yeah, I don't know. There's some other things we could talk about as well, but that's the main one. I think, you know, the other positions we hold, they're up for debate as well. I think I'll gladly argue. We'll see if we get any more socialists coming in or anything. But, yeah. If you join that Discord and there's anything you disagree with me about, feel free to let me know. We can have a conversation about it. That's what we're here to do, have our beliefs challenged. So, yep, feel free to join that. But yeah, I think that's going to be the end. Feel free to join the Discord if there's anything you disagree with that you didn't get to say to all the people that came out today. Let me know in the Discord and we could set up a chat about it. But otherwise, I appreciate everyone that came out today. Thanks and have